is preserved food? In this day and age, most preserved food you will come across is probably packaged with artificial preservatives in the shops. The whole idea of preserving food is to make food last longer than it usually would if left otherwise unpreserved. Today I'm going to tell you about 4 different ways that I preserve food in my home so that I always have something ready to go in the fridge that I can just add to something else and give an abundance of flavor and make anything exciting and flavorsome ready to eat. The first thing I do, and is probably the most flavor bomb type thing that I can think of, is pickling and fermenting. There is never a time that I don't have some sort of fermented cabbage. Maybe you've heard of things like sauerkraut and kimchi. They are fermented cabbage. And at the shops, they usually charge at least $15 for a small jar, whereas you can buy a whole cabbage for as cheap as like $3, salt it, flavor it, and you're ready to go. And it lasts a long time. You can keep it there in the back burner for whenever you want it, and it's fun because every time I make it, it tastes a little bit different, so you never really know what you're going to get. Fermented vegetables usually tend to be very strong and a little bit bitter in some sense, very savory, where things like pickles, where you can do your traditional gherkin type thing, or what I like to do is usually pickled onions or pickled radishes. If you use a sugar syrup vinegar based pickling liquid, then they become nice and sweet and add just a little bit of delightfulness to things like sandwiches, salads, anything you want really. Another way that you can make some vegetables last longer that's not directly pickling or a fermenting method, but it's somewhere in between, is a salsa or a vinaigrette, because you can make them and they'll last quite a while in your fridge. Definitely not as long as the pickling or the fermenting, but you can make it in a larger quantity and keep it in your fridge for a week or 2, and they're still really good to add to many different things. The second way of preserving food that I have mentioned many times on this channel before is freezing. You can make food in large quantities and freeze a portion of it for later, and that's ready to go. You can freeze vegetables that you've bought in large quantities as well that you know you're going to use regularly. The third type of preserving is, this one is not long-term preserve, but it definitely gives you a little bit more of wiggle room, is marinating. Marinating is mostly known for what it does to the food. It adds lots of flavor and it keeps different cuts of meat tender and juicy when you cook them. But marinating is also really good because, for example, when I go to the butcher, I either buy many things and keep some in the freezer, or I'll buy something that I'll eat today and then marinate something to eat maybe only in 2 days' time. If I bought it and didn't marinate it, I'd be worried that it might go off or I might forget about it, but having that marinating process gives me a little bit more leeway, keeps it fresh, and adds a whole bunch of flavor too. Another way to make different cuts of meat last a little bit longer or give you a little bit more wiggle room as to when you have to use it is by salting it, but that's a whole different thing and a little bit more complex to a thing for what most of us home cooks do in our everyday lives. So I don't want to overcomplicate it, I won't go too much into it, but if you are curious and learning more about salting and what salt does to food, I'd highly recommend listening to Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat on Audible, which is what I'm doing right now and absolutely enjoying it. The fourth thing you can do to help your food last a little bit longer than it usually would is by cooking it. That's as easy as it gets. Simply cook your food. Like I mentioned with different cuts of meat, if you don't cook it, they do go off very easily. So by cooking it, then it will last much longer than it would raw. This doesn't apply only to just raw cuts of meat, but anything. Vegetables tend to shrivel up in the fridge or sprout in your cupboard, go moldy. So by cooking it, it'll last a little bit longer in your fridge and you can turn it into a variety of different things. You don't have to cook things bland and use it later. You can also turn things into different things that will add flavor. Just like with the fermenting and the pickling, things like dips and sauces are really good to make in a larger quantity and keep it in your fridge for you to use throughout a week or 2. Going back to the point that most foods that you buy at the shops are preserved doesn't mean that they're all bad for you. Things like olives, sun-dried tomatoes, mayo, mustard, canned tuna, they're all really good preserved foods that are easily available at your supermarket that you can buy and keep it in your fridge or in your cupboard for when you do need a little bit of an extra flavor boost or an easy way to add some protein to your food like tuna. The last and final way that food is preserved is through dehydrating. If you are willing to go through the process of dehydrating food, go for it. I don't personally do this. I think for home cooking is unnecessary, but there are certain things that you can buy already dehydrated and keep it in your pantry that are actually really useful. This is as simple as spices. They are actually dehydrated things and ground up that I use all the time in my cooking. Dried mushrooms, when I make noodle soups, they rehydrate really quickly and add so much flavor to a simple broth that is so heartwarming and delicious on a winter evening. So these are some of the ways that I preserve food and make food last longer than it usually would in my kitchen. Not only do these preserving methods help me waste less food, but it also helps add so much more flavor to everything that I cook with or add those things to. So let me know if you have any other preservation methods that you do at your house in the comments below, and I will see you in the next video. You're watching Food for Days.